What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Shug Nasty here. Thanks for tuning in. So today I want to talk about the supply shortages in Pokemon. And when I say supply shortages, that's nothing to do with the short printing or whatever people are calling this black and white situation. And I'm not talking about that at all. This is more so addressing the chronic supply shortages over the last 6 months with Pokemon cards and how people aren't able to find product in stores at a readily available times. It's people are going crazy for Pokemon cards right now, lining up. When they hear the drop is coming and waiting in line for 24 hours at a time, just to get a box of something, which is it's just crazy to me. I'm not one of those people. I mean, not judging. I'm just not one of those people that has enough time or wants to spend that much time or is that hyped on Pokemon. I do love Pokemon, but I'm not going to wait in line and go be a part of all that craziness, especially with all the fights going on. And then, we talked about this on the Beyond the Binder podcast. If you're not familiar, me, Son of a Merc, iFOMO, and Bay Showcase do a podcast every Saturday at 9 p.m. Pacific time on Son of a Merc's channel called Beyond the Binder. But we did touch on this, and Bays was talking about how, with people got to be careful because there's people that carry guns on them and people that are not afraid to just, if they feel threatened to use it. So I'm not one of those people that's willing to risk my life over Pokemon or risk getting hurt or, do any of that. And anyways, yeah, so it's definitely an issue. We've seen it in the content being created and all this craziness going on. And a lot of people, when you look at these videos or these posts related to the supply shortages, you see in the comments a lot of people saying Pokemon just needs to print to demand. Pokemon just needs to print this set to oblivion. Pokemon just needs to print it to the ground. Whatever. There's a different way people phrase it, but it's generally they're getting at the same thing and just saying print as much as they can of a product. And while I think that is a fair thing to say, and it's definitely a solution in the short term, I don't think it's necessarily the smartest thing, depending on your perspective as a collector or investor or whoever you are. It's not the smartest, I think, course of action for Pokemon. And I think Pokemon knows this. I think they're well aware of this. And why I say that is because depending on, like I said, your perspective as why you collect something. I think that the psychology of collectibles and the reason people want to collect them is, one, they like the way they look, they have some kind of emotional attachment to it, or just inherent desire for that item. But I think there's also a part of that it comes from the exclusivity of the item, or the scarcity of the item, or the rarity of the item, how hard it is to obtain. I think there's a large proportion of the people that are collecting or investing in these products that do consider that as a part of the reason why they like something. And I'm one of those people. I think if something's super available and easy to get, I'm not gonna really desire it. That's why I like vintage Pokemon cards and stuff that's more niche, because it's stuff that people aren't aware of, or it's very hard to get in general or in good condition. And so for me, and I think like I said, a good proportion of collectors, this is something that needs to be considered. And if you look back at a lot of people are familiar with this, and it was talked about a lot in YouTube or on YouTube probably 4 or 5 years ago during the first boom that we'd seen, or the last boom we'd seen, not the first boom, but the last one in like 2021 area or time frame. And it was the junk wax era of sports cards. If you're not familiar, it's pretty much what's going on right now in Pokemon. Maybe not exactly to that extent, but it has signs and similarities, I guess, to that, where there's a lot of hype and increase in demand, like a huge surge in demand for sports cards. A lot of people entering the hobby from outside that didn't used to collect sport cards. The prices for them went up exponentially, and then people started seeing them as an alternative asset and started hoarding the product and buying the product, lots and lots of things, because there are lots and lots of product, because they thought, I could make money off of this. And some people probably did make money off of it back then. I wasn't there, but from what I heard, they did. However, as the demand grew, the manufacturers of these cards saw that there was an opportunity to make more and more money. So they just print, like we say all the time, they print it to demand, they print it to oblivion, they printed it to the ground. And there was so much of this product out there that it started sitting on shelves because it was too available. There was too much of it. People couldn't buy enough of it because it was just there. That's how much there was. And so it started sitting on store shelves, and for months or whatever period of time, long periods of time. And the manufacturer actually they had to go back and repurchase the stuff from the retailer to buy it back, because as a person or a brand that makes collectibles, if your collectible is just sitting on shelves, it doesn't look good. If Pokemon cards are just, it just makes it look like the product is not, it's not collectible. It's just it's overly abundant and anybody can get it. There's no rarity in the secondhand market. People aren't going to buy from the secondhand market. There's going to be no like added value in the future, and those cards are just, it kills the price of the value of the product, and if people could just go into the store and buy it retail. And if you look at these products nowadays, go on eBay, type in junk wax era sports booster box or whatever, those prices are like, you can still find booster boxes for $15, $20. I don't know what the retail is back then, but I'm imagining it was probably around then, around that price, maybe even less or whatever, but very, very low price for something that's 35, 40 years old. I'm just saying. So that's a good case study. A bit of a tangent, but it gives you some background into the reason why, Pokemon might be not, just printing everything into the ground, because they just killed that era of sports cards, and they're just not collectible. Even now, people don't really desire them, because there's still tons of it out there. Like I said, on eBay, you can go look it up. But yeah, so that's something that I think Pokemon considers, and something people should consider when they're thinking, just print it to the ground. And I know there are some people out there that don't care about, like I said, don't care about the value of the cards, but I don't think that's everybody, and I don't even think that's the large majority. So, instead, this is going to be a really long video. I'm sorry if you're still here. I think this is a pretty good, theory or point of view, but so I encourage you to stick around. But it to get to my point, I think that Pokemon is instead, looking at where is this demand coming from. Obviously, there's some hype in the market, and a lot of it's not too organic, the demand we're seeing right now. But you have to look at like the why. Is it hype driven demand? Is it organic? And then you have to look at where is this demand coming from? Is it for English cards and Japanese cards? Is it just within these the North American region for English cards, the English speaking countries for English cards? For Japanese, is it just in Japan? Is it just inside of in Japan, or is it coming from outside? And I think it's pretty apparent, and most people know that, like especially with Japanese cards, that these cards are being taken out of Japan and sold outside of Japan for because they're released before the English set or any other set is released. So the hype behind it, and the people wanting the newest thing, to be the first to have it or be a part of what's the new exciting thing. That's a big reason people buy Japanese cards, I believe. And so you get a lot of demand from outside these regional markets, these outside of these language markets. And I don't know if Pokemon, I would assume that they don't have a good way of gauging how much of that demand is within that area, that region, like North America, and how much is outside of it. Like if, China is buying English cards, I don't know if they have a good way of gauging that. Maybe they do. But I think they're, accounting for demand as a whole. Probably it's probably too difficult to know how much exactly is coming from where. So they're accounting for the demand as a whole, but they are aware that some of that demand is coming from outside of those markets. And so I think they're looking at where they can as best as they can to see which markets that have high demand for Pokemon but don't have Pokemon printed in their languages. They're looking at those markets, and they're starting to develop those markets by printing the Pokemon cards in those languages. Most recently, we saw that with the Latin American Spanish cards. I think it was just announced in last February at Pokemon Day, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken. And then the first set I think printed was the Journey Together set. So that was a big market that they saw that had a need for cards to be printed in its language, so they went and did that. Prior to that was the simplified Chinese market in 2019, I think that came about, and that was a huge market. It was talked about a lot about the Chinese buyers, the Chinese collectors being like having a big impact on demand. And so I think that they're trying to rebalance demand in these English markets and Japanese markets by trying to bring back some of the demand to these other languages of where collectors reside outside of those regions, and trying to, like I said, rebalance demand so it doesn't put so much pressure on the English manufacturers to supply enough cards for cards in North America, in Europe, or other English speaking countries, and then also outside of those countries. It alleviates a lot of pressure. And like I said, this is a long-term thing because logistically and, you know, there's just so much that goes into it, way above my understanding of everything, way above my head. I just know it's not as easy as people think to just open up another print facility or just start printing more cards or just do this, do that. This is such a big company. It's the biggest IP in the world, and there's a lot that goes into doing this. So a lot of people, I think, with that being said, I think there's an argument to be said that, okay, well, even if they did print cards in, you know, Latin American Spanish, there'll be collectors that will still want cards printed in English or cards printed in Japanese because the history of those cards is already well established. The value of those cards on the secondhand market is already well established, and they won't care that the cards are printed in their language, which I think is a very fair to say, and it probably is true for a proportion of collectors. But again, Pokemon is very smart, and Pokemon is very well aware of this. They, in my opinion, have certain tactics that they're using, and I don't know of all of them, but this is just one that I thought of, is the language exclusive products they're making. In China, China's been killing it with language exclusive products. If you follow the market in China or just follow Pokemon in China, you'll be well aware of like products like these Evolution boxes. You have the Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon boxes, all have like exclusive accessories, deck boxes, dice, playmats, binders, and each of the evolutions have this. This is just the three, but each of the evolutions have this, and this is something that's exclusive, like I said, to China. They have their own 151 set, they have their own 151 arts, their own reverses, their cards look unique. They have the 151 promo that's 1,510 copies, and it's a 151 Mew promo, unique art to China. But that's something it's super cool, super unique, and it attracts people to that market. There's a lot of people now outside of China that are like wanting to get these products, wanting to get the exclusive 151 sets, wanting to, like me, buy these evolution boxes because they're really cool. But that tactic of like making these exclusive products and making Chinese cards desirable is gonna, you know, keep a lot of the demand within that region by like with Chinese buyers. In my opinion, that's what I think they're trying to do. Same with Korean cards. They had this Ditto Metamon Project promo that recently released, and it was just a Ditto. It was other Pokemon, but the Ditto like formed into like a Lapras. Pikachu on the Lapras is back, and a few other Pokemon in the background. It's a really cool art. And I really wanted to get them. I wanted to actually make a play and try and get like 100 copies because I thought this card will probably be, it's Korean, it's going to be cheap. I thought it'd be like $5 to $10. And it didn't actually end up being that. It was way over that on release. It was like $100 a copy. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy for a Korean card. There's no way I'm going to spend $100 a copy. And I waited. It's like went down to 70, then 50, then 40. I think it's like at 40. It's maybe, I haven't checked in a week or so, but just another really cool example of an exclusive product. And I'm sure they're going to have a lot more for these other languages. I don't know if Latin American Spanish has any exclusive products yet, but again, I think this is a tactic that they're going to employ, and they're going to get a lot of organic demand built up around these regional markets that, like I said, rebalances the global demand for products like on the English markets and the Japanese markets. And I say that because those are like the two biggest markets, I think, in Pokemon, and you have a lot of outside global demand from outside those regions going into get those cards. And that's not like the only thing. I think there's a lot of stuff they're going to do in the short term as far as like addressing these print shortages. To just really quickly address the short printing of black and white, I know most of that was talked about, I think, on the English side, all this things with Poke Beach and YouTubers talking about that. Just from a Japanese perspective side, from what I've heard from the lottery entries, they're way better. The chances of getting the boxes than Destined Rivals was, or the Heatwave Arena was. Those were like a 20 to 30% chance, I believe, for those boxes. And from just anecdotally, this is all anecdotally, from what I've heard on Twitter and from friends that entered the lottery in Japan. But from the black and white stuff, it's like it's closer to 70% ish, 60 to 70% of people are winning the lottery. Now, like I said, it's anecdotal, so take that for what it is. It's also on the Japanese side of things. But in the short term, it seems like either there was just not as much demand for the black and white set, even though it's pretty hype and like talked about a lot, or they just printed a lot more than they did of the Rocket set, which who knows? I'm not going to try and speculate on how much Pokemon's printing. it doesn't really matter to me. I'll get the sets eventually when I get them. But yeah, I think there's other things, like I said, that they're doing in the short term, but they have stuff in the long term that's gonna help. And I think the main thing is for people to understand is, I understand a lot of people are new here and have just got back into Pokemon, but this will, it will pass. It's not going to be like this forever. You might not be able to get as much of a product as you want, but there will be more. There'll be better things. There'll always be something cooler that Pokemon comes out with. I think we're gonna, and we'll forget about this, but it's not worth it in my opinion to stress over these things. And I know it can be frustrating, but try to look in other places. That's what I do. Like, I've pulled back from modern a bit recently, and I just go into like the Diamond and Pearl, old black and white era, the vintage era. I love buying like vintage, heavy played, moderately played hollows in Japanese because they're cheap. They're a few dollars a piece, and then you get a really nice binder, put them in there, and it just looks cool. It's a fun way to collect. There's other areas of Pokemon you can look at, and the stuff is still cheap. You gotta find it. But that's just my piece. Let me know, like I said, what you think of my take on the Pokemon's solution or strategic plan to address the supply shortages and rebalance demand through printing Pokemon in more languages is pretty much what I think they're trying to do. And it helps with their plans for global expansion. Obviously, they're trying to be a company. They're the biggest IP, and they're trying to be like 100-year company. They were talking about that's like their foreseeable, like how long I think Ishihara was saying we could be an 100-year company, or I foresee Pokemon lasting 100 years. So I think they got big plans and great plans in place, very solid, more than we could ever think about, because now I don't even know what I'm saying now. Anyways, that's pretty much all I had to say. They know what they're doing. They're smarter than we think they are, than we give them credit for, and I think we'll be fine. Just like I said, be patient, and that's it. Yeah, let me know what you guys think of the video. If you're a PokeTuber and want to react and make your own video, please do so. If you're not, just leave something in the comments of your opinion on everything, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.